Hello, writers. Come write with me. My name is Michaela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my channel, Write with Michaela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so that you can go on this journey with me. Today is Friday, which is story time, or the day of our chapter exchange. If you're writing with me and you wish to exchange chapters, then send your chapter with written permission to writewithmichaela@gmail.com. I will post the email address at the end of the video. I'm looking forward to reading your chapters, even if I can't read them all on the channel. All chapters read on Fridays, whether they are mine or another writer's work, are copyright protected material, and no one may use any part in writing their own stories. This story is also PG-13, so if you are under 13 years of age, you need parental guidance. The story is in its rough draft stage, just as the last story we heard, and probably every story that we will read on this channel, because they are not publisher ready or ready to be published. The title of the story is Tajiia, and today we are reading chapter 20. If you would like to read along, then send an email to the email I stated earlier and request a PDF of the chapter. Make sure you're specific about either City of the Ancients or Tajiia and which chapter. Now let's start. Tajiia, chapter 20, Wizards. In the morning, Tajiia was on the mountain path, sitting on a rock, and Anton stood as a guard. The soldiers had indeed pulled out, because commanders were trying to learn how many soldiers they had left, and they wanted to plan something. Several commanders felt they needed more soldiers. Anton was nervous because he could see the troops, but he stood quietly. Tajiia looked up at him and asked, "How would you like to ride a bird?" This question seemed so surreal to him that he wouldn't have known how to answer under normal conditions. Soldiers have some position that goes and looks at things, stated Tajiia, and then they report back. "A scout?" asked Anton. "I suppose," replied Tajiia. "I don't know the term. Do you want to be a scout and ride a bird?" Anton raised his eyebrows. "I suppose that would be good." Soon a large bird landed nearby, and Tajiia gave the instructions. They flew off. They flew west and saw the wizards. Anton estimated that the wizards would be to the mountain by mid-morning, and he estimated somewhere between 75 and 100 wizards. Then they flew south and found a group of huntsmen and handlers with dogs that had left the villages once they found people were missing. Anton didn't know how to estimate their arrival, and he didn't estimate their numbers because they didn't seem to be in formation. They flew back to the mountain. Anton could tell the troops were getting ready to head inside once again. Tajiia got them off the bird and then went to report things in the room with the queens and chancellors. One soldier asked Anton how he got his estimates, and Anton told the number of lines and the number across for the wizards. He stated that not all lines had 8 across. "No, I mean, well, you're speaking like you saw them, but mid-morning is..." And Anton didn't know how to respond. He looked at Tajiia. He motioned to her. "Well, the Grand Queen took me on a ride. She shrank us down and tied us on a bird. I've never done that, so mid-morning may not be accurate. I now have a new respect for birds." Everyone could tell that Anton was a little uncomfortable, but they started their new plans. Shortly after they planned things, they heard the mountain once again welcoming the soldiers and asking them to remove their shoes. Since more soldiers had joined the witching community, Soldiers were pairing up with mentors as well as queens and chancellors. The soldiers were going to fight the other soldiers, and they hoped to finish most of the battles before the wizards came in. Witches and warlocks and the few wizards would place protection spells over the soldier with them, and they would add their fire and their reflection spells. Chaos erupted in the tunnels as soldiers fought soldier. Commanders soon realized the betrayal to their side and would ask the soldiers what they were doing. Some didn't answer and just concentrated on their sword fight. Some would name someone that the soldiers had killed that were innocent. Anton said, "Because now I'm on the right side. I'm on the side of justice." Some commanders tried to command the soldiers to stand down and come back to the side they belonged to. But the soldiers had had enough. Several soldiers on the wrong side became the last ones standing, and they thought to throw their swords down. "Show me you serve justice," they said. At that point, a witch or wizard would appear by changing to their natural form and tell the soldier with them if their thoughts were genuine. Several were, a few weren't, and the soldiers fighting for Tajiia took these soldiers prisoners. Another first for the witching community. Artur took charge of this group. Artur at first didn't know where to place them, but he found a chamber where the tree roots grew in front of. He thought to himself that it must be the tree Tajiia had spoken with. Bodies of soldiers were all in the tunnels because the witching community removed their dead and injured, but the soldiers didn't. Many soldiers, many soldiers were ready to retreat when the mountain once again welcomed visitors and asked them to remove their shoes. They thought they had the reinforcements they needed. Dravenite looked up and around. "Parlor trick," he stated. He touched his wand to the cavern entrance, and sparks flew. Tajiia was near Anton, and he had just finished taking care of the last soldier against Tahia's group. Anton looked at her and thought she would be pleased, but she held her hands out in front of herself. As she shook her hands, sparks shot forth. Tajiia cocked her head to the side. "Now, it's my turn to battle." Everyone in the intersection glanced around, and then they saw Tajiia throw sparks of light up to the ceiling. The sparks zigzagged like lightning, and they shot down the tunnel. "Get her to the chamber," Arshwaya said to Anton. "She will not know anything going on around her." Anton sheathed his sword and wrapped an arm across her shoulders and started guiding her to the chamber. Two other soldiers went with him. One hurried up to get in front of him, and the other took the rear. Dravenite smiled, very self-satisfied. "We will not have to waste soldiers on this anymore. Come, let's finish off these termites." Then suddenly, several wizards saw streaks of light zooming along the ceiling, and they backed up. The streams of light shot down and struck Dravenite, and he fell backwards. "Help me up. Whoever did that is going to pay." A couple of wizards helped him up, and they proceeded into the tunnel. Anton had walked quickly and had Tajiia in the chamber in no time, but he wanted to go back out and fight. The two soldiers with him agreed to guard the chamber. Before Anton left, he spoke to Hilbald. "I don't know protocol, but Arshwaya said Tajiia wouldn't know anything around her." He wasn't sure how to proceed with the topic. "I'll get her out of her trance if need be," stated Hilbald. Anton was satisfied, so he left. So a few wizards walked through the next air walls, and since Dravenite had already shot the air wall at the entrance, Tajiia could now distinguish between her witching community and the king's wizards. Dravenite was not leading. It was in the middle. And when the wizards in front of him shot through the air wall and became rocks, he jerked up and stood straight. He looked around, trying to find his wizards. Then he realized the air wall was there, so he shot the air wall. The attack on her air wall startled and somewhat angered Tajiia. So instead of releasing the air wall, she had it fall on Dravenite like a blanket. Helbob touched her shoulder, pressed thoughts into her. No emotion. Your stronger magic is not with anger. Then he turned back and continued helping the injured. Tajiia calmed. She decided it was good for her to see what he was capable of. Dravenite fought the air blanket for several minutes, and he nearly slipped on the loose rocks. But then he found his anger, and his anger strengthened his magic. He shot the blanket that enclosed him, but just before he did, a magical rope encircled the bottom of the blanket and his ankles and pulled. Dravenite fell back, and his magical shot went up into the ceiling, which caused chunks of the ceiling to fall down on him. Several other wizards realized that he would have shot them if they had been standing in front of him, and that was scary. One said, the king said these here were losing magic, but he dared not finish his sentence. Dravenite got out of the blanket and stood up. He faced the wizards. This is nothing, he said. You may see fire, but we have lava. You may see wind, but we have twisters. These people have no books and no teachers. We will show them power. He whirled around and marched down the tunnel. He didn't think about the wizards that he kept in front of himself. The witching community still had witches and warlocks that were bugs on the walls, and some of them had heard Dravenite, so they passed the thoughts. Several became fearful. When Artur received the thoughts, he chuckled. Maybe so, he said aloud, but I wouldn't give Tajiia those ideas. He glanced behind himself at the soldiers behind the tree roots. They didn't know what to make about the warlock talking to himself. The witching community convinced the soldiers with them to retreat and hide. Tharkek told those around him that they would have another opportunity to fight, especially when they rescued the people in the villages. He told them he had received thoughts that the Grand Queen had thought this was her battle. So the soldiers went into hiding with the witching community. There were still many soldiers from the king in the tunnels, and eventually some met up with the wizards. "Ah, it is good that you are here," stated a commander. "These witches have gained courage and knowledge. We've never had such trouble." "I would say you finally caught them without enough food, and they can't stay here too long without starving," stated Dravenite. "They are cowards, and they are desperate, but we will rout them out." At that moment, Dravenite spotted an air wall. He walked towards it and stretched his hand towards it. He was saying his spell inaudibly. Finally, he reached out and grasped the air wall with his hand and yanked it down. "Ah, Tajiia made this wall, and Tajiia is mine." Tajiia jerked back and rolled over. She grasped her arms. Dravenite indeed had some lethal spells. Only the spells she said in the morning to Mother Nature and the Universe Divine protected her. But she knew what she would do to the next air wall. Dravenite tried to grab. She lay on the floor for several minutes, trying to recover. Several were in the chamber, and they saw Tajiia's reaction. But before they could react, Helbob stood in guard position and did not let them near. Helbob alone knew what she was up against. The halls echoed. Dravenite has betrayed Mother Nature and will pay the price. Dravenite knew the statement was several seconds, if not half a minute, since he jerked down the wall, so he knew he had hurt her. He went to sling the air wall away. This time the air wall turned into 5 sword blades that whirled back towards Dravenite. Wizards and soldiers scattered, but Dravenite blocked the swords magically. He was about to say parlor tricks again when he heard the sword clang against the tunnel wall. He wanted to know if the sword was real, but he dared not pick it up. He looked at the soldiers and assessed them to see if he could ask one of them to pick up one of the swords. He saw the fear in their eyes. He glanced back to his wizards as they reassembled around him. A smile spread across his face. Tajiia might just be a worthy opponent. Tell me, what village harbored her? No one knew what to say or how to respond. Tokrel and Baron had been going to the Queen's and Chancellor's chamber, and even though their queen was Lofsa, they felt like Tajiia was their queen. Deep inside them, they knew she would be Grand Queen, but she was from their village. Now they knew the thoughts Tajiia was getting from Dravenite's spoken words, and they knew Dravenite was threatening their village. Both looked towards Tajiia to see what she would do, but Helbob blocked their view. Helbob reminded her with thoughts that he could send to her and her alone, that Mother Nature aided her, and the universe divine protected her. She need not fear. The time of balance was coming. Tajiia now knew that King Pomodestone was not the source of power. The true source of power was Dravenite. In her mind, he had wished for lava, and she was forming a plan in her mind to give it to him. She also knew that even though King Pomodestone was a puppet, many among Dravenite's group of wizards would be willing to step into his role. So she had to complete her plan. However, with Helbob's thoughts in her head, she had to revise her current plan. She could not become what she fought. Shaful decided to draw more animals and see if she could get the names for them. She drew a wolf, and Arswea thought with Autur for the name or word in which that he used. The witching community was a little on edge because the wizards never ventured far from the castle, and this wizard, Dravenite, was tearing through Tajiia's walls. If she couldn't fight him, then they knew they couldn't either. Suddenly, Tajiia realized that Dravenite was not a wizard, but a warlock. Otherwise, he would not have used his hand to rip down her wall. So she knew what she would do. She smiled to herself. The next air wall shot out arrows on fire before the wizards and soldiers got too near. Some soldiers dove down. Some used their shields. Dravenite was ahead of the wizards now, and he shielded himself. Then he sent lava at the air wall. Tajiia was reflecting it, but since she was not in the tunnel, she misjudged the distance, and the lava touched the air wall before it reflected it. Tajiia screamed out and writhed in pain. Helbob shot a spell at her that cooled her down. Tajiia glanced at him. Grutless. Helbob nodded his head toward her. Everyone needs someone or help from someone. Your magic feeds my existence, so I did it gladly. Tajiia rolled back up to a sit. She was still in pain, but she was learning Dravenite and his magic. The next air wall the castle wizards came to did nothing, and Dravenite did not realize it was there. But he spotted the mirror, and he admired his own image. Then the image in the mirror used his voice and asked him why he carried a wand. Was he that loyal to King Pomodestone? Dravenite laughed. King Pomodestone is nothing without me. He thinks he can take my wand at night, and I'm not a threat to him. He laughed again. He is so naive, but he is very useful to me. The soldiers and wizards around Dravenite became leery, and some backed through the air wall. This time the air wall did not make them rocks, but placed them in invisible bubbles and slid them to different places in the tunnel. Those bubbles trapped those soldiers and wizards there for now. Dravenite didn't notice the motion behind him as his body filled the entire mirror. At the next mirror, Dravenite saw an image of himself in the king's attire. And the mirror said, I think this looks much better. I think this is what I deserve. Dravenite nodded approvingly. He turned to the nearest soldier. Maybe that's the best idea. After we get rid of the pest in this mountain, we will demand that King Pomodestone give us the respect we deserve. After all, what has he done for us? He does nothing but sit on his throne and order us around. That's not right, is it? The soldier shook his head no, and glanced at the wizards. Then he realized there were fewer of them. He wondered if the wizards were splitting up like the soldiers had done. But he also realized there were fewer soldiers. So he decided to drop back and go find the soldiers that were supposed to be with him. This happened several more times until Dravenite turned to get a response from someone behind him, and there was no one there. He turned back to the mirror, and an image of Tajiia appeared. You are finally alone. I am alone. We will fight. Dravenite threw a spell at the mirror, and the mirror did two things. It reflected the spell back to Dravenite, and the glass broke, like real glass, with shards of glass spraying back towards Dravenite. Dravenite magically shielded himself from his own spell, but not the shards of glass. He shouted at the tunnel. The mirror was magic. The glass cannot cut. You used the forbidden magic. The tunnels echoed. No, I use protection magic. I am protecting myself from your deception, your lies, and your false all was Visman Shasustan. Dravenite realized immediately that Tajiia, whosoever she was, spoke witch. And with that realization, he realized that he needed to start paying closer attention. He tried to remember what the air wall felt like that he grabbed. He had been so busy attacking it that he hadn't analyzed the spells it contained. He looked around the tunnel. It was eerily quiet. Where were his wizards? Did he want to fight Tajiia in here, where she could hide? Maybe he should evacuate the tunnels and find her village. She would come to her village to protect the people there. He turned back the way he came and started slowly making his way out. But Tajiia had spoken to the mountain, and Dravenite would not make it out. He would end up in a special chamber where he would meet Tajiia. While Tajiia was meeting Dravenite, the rest of the community would see if there were any wizards that would switch sides. If not, they would leave them in their bubble until Tajiia finished her fight or she died. Many didn't want her to fight Dravenite alone. But Tajiia looked at Anton and said, "He didn't want us to separate him from his men. But I cannot fight and protect at the same time. The wind and the mountain will aid me, as they already have." "Well, at least take a few more tests," put in Chancellor Wildcarl. "Every test gives you ideas, and I think that's what you need right now." Tajiia agreed. The soldiers enjoyed watching the test, especially since they were the first non-magic users who were not new students to ever get to see the test. They also enjoyed it when witches and wizards proclaimed she didn't pass, while others said clearly she did. Dravenite was wandering through many passageways, and he didn't realize they weren't the ones he had used, because the mountain agreed to help Tajiia. Tajiia passed 12 more tests before she went to meet Dravenite in the special chamber, and she would arrive before him. All in the witching community, including the soldiers who had just joined them, were nervous. But they decided to let others take their tests while they waited, and several gave Chancellor Wildcarl warnings to add to his list. After some time, Anton asked, "What is the first test?" Arswaya told him, and then she asked Allah to demonstrate. Anton looked around at the soldiers. He knew he was risking a lot with what he was about to ask, but he asked for the words Allah said. Chancellor Wildcarl very quickly said that no one could give the words, but they could let him read a book. Anton asked if the book could read itself to him until he learned to read. The other 3 soldiers that had been with him when Tajiia first brought him in the chamber in the tree raised their hands and asked for a book too. Dravenite was starting to wonder if he had taken a wrong turn when he came into the chamber with Tajiia. Tajiia was patiently sitting on a stone stump just past the middle of the chamber, and the mountain sealed off the chamber. Dravenite said, "How do I know you are real and not an image?" Tajiia made an image and said, "I am real, and I am an image. Could you not do an image of yourself?" Dravenite did. While he said the spell inaudibly, Tajiia caught the words and knew he did not use sands of time. That was going to be her best advantage. Her spells could last, but he would have to concentrate on his spells to keep them going. But just to be safe, to be extra safe, she said her morning prayer to double her protection over herself. Dravenite didn't know which was Tajiia and which was an image, but he knew how to split a spell in 2 pieces, and both pieces would be as lethal as the other. He sent a spell to steal her breath, and she easily reversed it. Tajiia thanked the soldiers for that warning. The soldiers looked up in the chamber as Tajiia's voice bounced around the room and gave her thanks to them. They exchanged glances with each other. One soldier who didn't have a book and hadn't gone with the queens and chancellors to check on the wizard said, "Maybe that's what we need to do, is write a list of all of Dravenite's tricks. I don't know so much about magic, but if we speak it, maybe Tajiia will get the message." "I will think the message," stated Hellbulb. "The chamber is protected so that nothing can go in. But I'm a gnome, so it is not protected against me." The soldiers started telling Hellbulb every trick they could think of that Dravenite used. Dravenite had choked a little, but he was able to defeat his spell. He then tried to cut out her tongue. Without her tongue, she could say no spells. Tajiia reversed it. Dravenite knew she could reverse his spells, but he wasn't fast enough, and the spell sliced off the tip of his tongue. He tried to speak with the tip of his tongue gone, He tried to speak, but with the tip of his tongue gone, he slurred his speech. You will pay for that. Tajiia shrugged. It was your spell, not mine. I don't know such evil spells. At that statement, Dravenite realized something. You took out the soothsayers' tongues. You do knows the spell. Tajiia shrugged and said, I'm not sure what you were talking about. The prisoners. How did you do that? He asked. But he said another spell in his head, and he would release it when she answered him. Tajiia saw the magic for his spell gather, as she was receiving thoughts from Helbub of all of Dravenite's tricks. She decided that she had to use magic like she never had before. She made herself invisible and moved off the stone stump. But she created another image and left it there. Only close observation would have seen a flicker. Also, it appeared that Commander Poulton came in from another tunnel. Ah, it's about time I see that witch die. Dravenite briefly glanced up, and then he released his spell. A constrictor snake encircled Tajiia on the stump and squeezed her tightly. The image had Tahia's voice, and it pleaded for help. Shall I slice off her head for you? Asked Commander Poulton. Dravenite motioned. Go right ahead. Then many things happened at once. Commander Poulton sliced off the image's head, and the image and the snake exploded into shards of light. Tajiia had protected herself in a bubble, but she also needed the sword that Commander Poulton's image had brought her. She dropped the bubble and pulled the sword to herself. She was swinging with all her might and growing to Waggler's size and strength. Dravenite saw the sword fly, and he turned in time to see the sword swinging across his shoulders. He didn't have the time to say a spell, and his head went rolling across the chamber. Tajiia didn't rejoice, and she didn't drop Waggler's size or strength, but she rotated to the head. Smoke was rising out of the head, and a smoke being rose out. This startled Tajiia, but she recovered quickly. Her mother, that she grew up with, always told her that what people accuse is often what they themselves do. Now she had to figure out how to defend herself against the forbidden magic. All people throughout the mountain froze and looked up and around. Witches, warlocks, and wizards froze. Soldiers from both sides froze. Everyone knew that something had just happened that shouldn't have. Helbub looked at Raisler and asked, Where is it? She must have it now. Raisler looked at him confused. Where is what? The dragon egg, said Ozzy and Alla in unison, as they suddenly saw pictures in their mind. Yes, said Tola, you told her about it. She looked at Ozzy and Alla and instantly knew Raisler had never said anything about the dragon egg out loud. They looked at Helbub to see if they were right. I don't know, stated Raisler. It was in the prophecy. Helbub pulled knowledge from all in the mountain to himself, including the mountain itself and all the people. And then he popped away. No one knew what to say in the chamber. Tajiia had said several protection spells, and she held the sword before her, but she didn't know how to fight the forbidden magic. Dravenite had already sent a spell which racked her entire body with pain because it penetrated her protection bubbles. Tajiia set spells to dissipate the pain. She placed several more protection bubbles over herself, and she was thinking of anything Balak had tried to see if that would help her now. But nothing was coming to mind. She remembered Hellbulb's thoughts earlier and just a few minutes ago. Dravenite split his spell and struck her twice. The spells penetrated the protection bubbles again. Tajiia remembered Twister, and she had never seen one, but she asked Mother Nature now for the words, and she sent it to the smoke being. The smoke being swirled around in the Twister, and it took several minutes for the smoke being to say the spell with the forbidden magic to undo the Twister. Then Dravenite split his spell in threes, something he had not done before. The spells hit Tajiia from both sides and the front. She had nothing to protect herself from these spells, and she wasn't able to reflect them yet. But at the last moment, she pushed the sword forward before her and sliced the end on the spell in front of herself. The pain was less, but she didn't know that. She thought through all the tricks Hellbulb thought Dravenite used, and decided ants were a good one. But since he was an air being, she made air ants. Dravenite raised his smoke arm and looked at it and laughed. Is this all you have? This can't harm me. I am air. He started his next spell. Tajiia suddenly knew how to reflect his spell, and she said the spell over the sword and spun around and sliced through all 4 pieces of his spell. The 8 pieces flew back to Dravenite. Dravenite disarmed the 8 pieces. Then he glanced at his head and his body. He needed to reassemble them. He didn't want to stay in the smoke form for the rest of his existence. He also didn't want Tajiia to know that he wanted them. He remembered seeing her and her image before, so that was an option. But then he thought he needed his head and body invisible, so that would be 2 spells and a lot of concentration with an enemy to watch as well. Still, he decided to attempt it. His only other option would be to leave and try to take over someone else's body. First name that popped into his mind was King Pomodestone. Tajiia watched the smoke being. She knew he was thinking, but she didn't get any thoughts. She felt this was a good time to attack. But she never used her magic against air before, so she wasn't sure what to do. She thought of her books and tried to think of which one would give her the most benefit. While she thought, she kept adding protection bubbles over herself. Dravenite made the image of his body and his head, and he made the real ones invisible. He tried to pull the invisible ones to himself, but the spell wasn't working so well on his smoky body. Tajiia realized that Dravenite's attention was on his physical body, the physical head, but she didn't know why. All she could think of was reattaching Jocelyn's eye. Then she wondered if Dravenite only had so much time to put his body back together. She glanced at the body and realized it was an image. But at the moment, she was glad he was focusing on that. She added another protection bubble over herself and kept thinking through her books. What exactly did she need to fight the forbidden magic? Suddenly, inside the innermost bubble, Hellbulb appeared before her. He was squatting in front of an egg. Tajiia squatted and laid the sword on the ground and touched the egg. The egg started hatching, and Hellbulb was gone. "No," said Dravenite. "Dragons are dead. That was part of the deal." He shot several lethal spells, and each spell removed a bubble. The images of his head and body were gone, and the real ones reappeared. The baby dragon burst from the shell and swirled around to face Dravenite. It raised up. Dravenite laughed. "What was I afraid of? It's just a baby. He can't help you for 10 to 20 years. The baby dragon opened his mouth, let out a sonic breath. The breath reverberated and shook the mountain. Tajiia then knew what she had to do. She had to say the spell that filled an entire book. It was one of her 13 books, and she had read it many times. Each time she read her books, she never knew when she would need it. But now she knew it stripped away ill-gotten magic, be it regular magic or forbidden magic. She remembered there were reasons to hold and use forbidden magic, but Dragonite had not used the forbidden magic for its true purpose, so it was ill-gotten. The spell was long, and it was hard to concentrate. As the baby kept his sonic breath going, Dragonite threw spell after spell at Tajiia, and Tajiia reflected them by placing an emerald wall before herself. The spells hit the wall and bounced back to Dragonite, and the wall did not lessen the dragon's breath. None of these spells hurt Dragonite. They would only hurt him if he were flesh, but still, with all the spells bouncing around the chamber, it was hard for Tajiia to concentrate. No one in the mountain could concentrate on anything. Many covered their ears. The king's soldiers headed out of the mountain. The queens, chancellors, and soldiers with them headed back to the chamber to see if anyone knew what the noise was. Ozzy looked up and asked, "A spell that fills a whole book?" Akel looked up. "The forbidden magic?" Hubbub held up a finger. "Ill-gotten. That could be forbidden magic, but it doesn't have to be." "Tajiia can't fight forbidden magic," stated Akel. No one answered, and many still covered their ears. Tajiia finished the spell, and the four winds came and took the smoke being apart, so that the body lay on the floor near her, and the head was across the chamber. Tajiia sank down to the baby dragon and leaned against him. "You just saved my life." She was now her normal size and strength. Tajiia received these thoughts. "You still have to finish your plan." Tajiia replied, "I know." Tajiia returned to the chamber, and they discussed things. None of the wizards had switched sides, so Tajiia gathered them in their bubbles, and Tajiia sent them out of the mountain on the wind. If the wind cooperated, then the wizards would land in the courtyard of the castle and would be in their bubbles until the sands of time ran out. The wizards had ridden horses to the mountains, so Tajiia magically unhobbled those. The witches, warlocks, and few wizards divided themselves up, and soldiers divided themselves up. In the morning, they would see if they could find some birds to take them to the 15 villages, so they could fight the huntsmen and handlers there. Then they would meet at the castle to finish those off there, and finally they would return to the mountain and contend with any soldiers that remained. The tree agreed to shorten its roots back once they left, so their prisoners could escape if they had any mind about them. Tajiia didn't speak much on her battle with Dragonite, but many were glad that she was okay, including Balak, and many stroked the baby dragon. Shaful drew the dragon on her pages. Now the community rested once again, but several still had ringing in their ears, and their ears hurt. Okay, writers, that is the end of chapter 20. Leave a comment below on what you thought of the sonic breath of the dragon, or what you thought of all the protection walls Tajiia kept putting on herself. I think Tajiia was quite scared, and she didn't know what to do, so she just doing, the only thing she knew to do was to keep protecting herself. So that's my opinion. I'd like to hear yours. Also, leave a comment on if you could say a spell that filled an entire book. LOL, right? Maybe if it's a short book, we could, but not a long book. So you got to think about, green eggs and ham. Yeah, maybe we could memorize that, but War and Peace, no. So we don't know how thick this book is. The question is to you, could you memorize a spell that filled an entire book? Now, all through the story so far, we've heard of King Pomostone, and we've never heard of Dragonite until, last chapter. But Dravenite is the one with the power. So you can say I had a false antagonist. Now, Tajiia had a plan to free the villages from martial law and to take the throne of King Pomodestone. And she still plans to do that. So join me Friday for chapter 21, King Pomodestone, and join me Tuesday for a writing prompt to add to your cave. I guess if your characters already got out of your cave, then you can explore the land around. But join me Tuesday and we will write together. Visit my website, bymichaela.com, read some character bios. Leave a comment on which characters on the website are your favorites so far. I hope you're enjoying writing your stories as much as I am. Don't forget to share your stories by sending them to writewithmichaela@gmail.com. That's the chapter exchange part. When you share your chapters with me, no polishing required. I saw some mistakes up there, and now I've got to figure out if I can go find them again. One was a comma. I had a comma at the end of a sentence instead of a period. I'm just like, what's that? But I was tempted to correct it in the script, but that won't help me because it has to be in the book that I have and not the script. So I had to go find that comma at the end of a sentence. And that's what I'm talking about. There's going to be mistakes. This is the first or second run through of this story, so there's mistakes in there. That one sentence was kind of hard to read. It wasn't very smooth. Maybe next time I read it, it's smooth for me. And that happens when I'm reading books too. I come up across the sentence and I had to read it a couple times. So maybe I have to fix it. Maybe I don't. I think it said everything it needed to say. I just said the wrong word at first. So when you send your chapters, no polishing is required. You can send your rough draft. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe and hit the bell so we can continue to write together. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, then please share it with them. This is Michaela with Write with Michaela. Bye for now.